Johannes is going to speak for a few minutes to give some of the broader contextualising information. Then I'm going to speak for hopefully not more than 10 minutes or so, and then hand back to Johannes. Johannes is going to speak specifically to screen practice as research, and I'm speaking to both theatre and performance practice broadly, but the examples I'm drawing on are applied theatre practice as research, and I'll explain a bit more about what that is when you get to my bit.
So, for those of you who didn't know it, Jenny is from Applied Theatre and the Centre for Applied Theatre Research, and I'm from Centre for Screen Studies, and my specialisation is, of course, screen practice as research. Now, should I start directly? Or? Yeah. Well, I'll just outline a few of the basic rules that are out there with regards to funding for practice as research. And this is broadly outlined by the HRC. And for those of you coming from social sciences, ESRC doesn't have the same rules, so you might have to look out into that yourself. But this is specifically with regards to AHRC funding and their requirement. So the last research assessment exercise, the RAE, they recognized practice-based, practice-led, and practice as research in their regulation. So we actually have to appreciate that United Kingdom is one of the few countries in Europe so far that recognizes practice as research, because what you do have usually in continental Europe at least is a division. If I, for example, would like to go and study film, I either have to study about film at the university, or I go to film school to actually learn how to make film. It's usually there are usually no possibility to actually do research on film and filmmaking and media in general by making media. So this is what we're speaking about here, and of course the same but with regards to theatre. So how should we define it? Now, just to emphasize here that people are still finding their way in the fields. It's very wishy-washy because people basically don't know really what practice as research is in detail, because it has, at the University of Manchester, drama, for example, you've only been able to do a practice-based PhD since 2002. So it hasn't been around for too long. So what we're trying to do here is to start to discuss these things and come up with problems, problematic aspects of the practice as research. So the few outlines I've suggested here is from the AHRC requirements for funding, and the first one is that practice must be an integral part of the proposed program of research, and the creative and or performative aspects of the research must be made explicit. So, for example, when our students come and say, hey, I want to do a practice-based PhD, in certain cases you have people coming just producing a film as an appendix, but that's not okay. What you actually have to do is to produce practice that further the theoretical argument. Yeah, so that's what it means, that the practice actually makes up an integral part of the research. The second thing is, of course, still what applies for all proposals, is about the enhancement of knowledge. As you might know by now, we're all supposed to produce new knowledge. I'm not sure what new knowledge is, but at least we have to pretend to do that. And the same thing goes, of course, for practice-based work. And ideally, if you want to do a practice-based PhD, for example, you have to motivate why you should use practice and not just do an ordinary theoretical PhD. And why is it actually useful for you to use practice? Why is it necessary? Why is it essential to the project? And the same, of course, goes for the major HRC-funded projects. And then we have what might be a bit difficult for artists doing research within the academic context, and that's, of course, how to recognize the scholarly apparatus. And as I will speak about later, there's a traditional schism between artists and academics on this, and you also have a bit of prejudice from both sides with regards to, for example, why you should have to contextualize your art by reading all of these theories and connect to it. But that's, of course, if you actually are applying for funding that is coming from an institution that only gives funding to scholarly work, you also have to produce a research context as a framework for your practice that connects into the academic debate and discourse in general, so that actually other people can make the most out of your research. So it's just about how to connect your practice to the scholarly framework that exists in a very similar way as we do in any other ordinary theoretical research. Okay, that's pretty much it. And I'll leave to Jenny for 10 minutes.
It struck me that, as Johannes was saying that it might sound odd for social scientists to hear that we have to speak to a scholarly framework, but for a lot of artists, including artists that work in academic contexts, they would claim that the arts process and product speaks for itself, and to introduce a textual or a discursive element to somehow make sense of it dilutes and reduces the complexity of the practice and the knowledge that's embedded in that practice in some way. And if we want to communicate that knowledge, then we do so most effectively through the art form, through the creative process. So this is a big discussion for people interested in practices of research, which is sort of why that was a really useful contextualisation of that. And research funding is pinned to this discussion. So everything, I think, what we both said today is sort of taking place against that backdrop. I'm going to address some of those things, but maybe not so explicitly. I want to talk about how creative arts practice can be conceptualised as research, and I'm hoping that what I'll say will speak we'll speak against this opposition between textual and discursive research and arts-based research. I think it's an unnecessary binary. I think, just to declare my line up front, I would see discursive reflection, writing, any kind of reflection really as part of practice, as a practice in itself, that probably always exceeds the sum of its parts somehow, and is part of a bigger process of making knowledge and making knowledge meaningful in the world in different ways. But then it is a very intriguing and interesting discussion to have, because I think it goes to the heart of what we think knowledge is, really. How we conceptualise creative practice as research. So I'm going to talk about that a bit. Specifically, if there are distinctions, how we articulate the distinctions between the research that takes place in professional practice. Many actors, many directors, many artists of all sorts do research as part of their professional practice, not necessarily in an academic context or for an academic end. How do we distinguish that research from academic research? I'm interested in that problem. I'm particularly interested in that problem because we're about to start a professional doctorate in applied theatre, where we're inviting into the academy professional practitioners that have had maybe 3 decades experience as artists, and we're inviting them in because we want them to conceptualise their often tacit knowledge base into a research outcome that can be shared with our students and with the broader academic community. So I'm thinking about this, how do I tell them they're not quite doing research at the moment when I believe they are, and how do we help them translate that into a knowledge outcome that can be shared, most importantly, for me, I think. So that's also the background to what I'm going to say. So one of the questions we ask our drama PG students every year is, when we're talking about practice as research as a methodology, is what's the vital ingredient that turns practice into research? And it's extraordinarily difficult to answer. A straightforward answer to that question might echo some of what Johannes has said. It's in-depth. It's a process that extends beyond the immediate context of practice. It's not just about this project that the artist is doing at this time. And it brings action and reflection into useful relationship and encounters with each other, and theory and practice into a useful encounter with each other that leads somewhere else. Many people in the practice research field might disagree with some of that, in particular the practice and theory encounter. Okay, so that's the straightforward answer. So the thing to emphasise is practice as research doesn't just lead to new kinds of practice. It leads to new kinds of practice driven by new kinds of understanding. That's a useful way of thinking about it. To answer the question in a less straightforward way, I'm going to talk through two examples of practice research in applied theatre, both of which have taken place here in the Drama Department of the University of Manchester as part of Arts and Humanities Research Council, which is our ESRC research projects. And I'm going to propose a three-pronged conceptual framework for how we might understand performance practice as research, made up of artistry, improvisation and decomposition. This is, well, just to speak through these, artistry refers to a crafted process of practice. This is a planned, systematic process that an artist is engaged in. Often it involves some engagement with social science research methodologies alongside the practice, but not always. But the key word there is crafted, I think, designed, somehow designed. Improvisation refers to research activities that aren't planned, that aren't designed. They're responses to unpredictable things, that chances, surprises that always come as part of an artistic, creative process. So they venture beyond the confines of crafted design. Decomposition is a more confusing one. I hope this one will become more clear as I talk through the examples. It's when both designed and improvised research activities decompose, they deteriorate in the face of particularly experiences that come out as that confound our expectations of a rule-bound or an orderly universe of some sort. And I hope that will be more clear as I talk through these two examples. Just to say something about the framework, it's not just my framework, it's come from, I've been working with two colleagues, one who used to be at the University of Manchester, attached to this first HRC project, Jenny Kidd, and another colleague from the Central School of Speech and Drama, who we've come together to write a chapter on what research methods in applied theatre might mean. So this comes from that, just to acknowledge their influence. Two HRC projects we've had, you can look at these online, I've got the website at the end of the PowerPoint. Performance and Learning and Heritage looked at performance activities that take place in museum and heritage sites and how performance might be used in those sites to engage visitors and enhance learning. In Place of War was a project that looked at theatre and performance in places of conflict internationally and also with communities affected by conflict who are now living in the UK, so refugees and asylum seekers. I'm going to talk through two of these examples very briefly. This Accursed Thing, it was a performance that explored new interpretations of Manchester Museum's collection in response to the transatlantic slave trade and abolition movement. It's an example of practice research. Social scientists in the room might find it easier to think of it as a piece of action research. You can think of it in that way if you want to. Here, the performance, which happened in the museum in different areas, rooms in the museum, was a creative response to research findings from the bigger project, and it put those research findings into practice and tested them out in some way. For example, one of the findings from the wider research project was that visitors were confused by performance. They were unsettled by the live encounter with history being brought to life, and were making some quite odd interpretations of what was going on and the meaning in performance. And that led to the implementation of much more interruptions in the performance and out-of-character moments where audience have a chance to ask questions of the actor and make connections and clarify things. So it was a piece of practice that tested a research finding to a certain extent. And it was also then the impact of the performance that was then researched by means of interviews and focus groups with people from young children to adults that had seen the performance both immediately after and 6 months after the project. Okay, to cut a long story short, the performance generated some powerful, very emotive responses that surprised the research team. Making this connection between the museum artefacts and the institution of the museum and the slave trade stimulated a process for some audience members of making connections to their own heritage in very difficult, challenging ways, and the contemporary realities of Manchester as a city, what it looks like and what it feels like. These experiences confounded the research team's expectations of affirming this research finding that we need these kind of framing devices to support learning. It wasn't that the framing devices were not important, it's that something else happened as well, which challenged them to extend and expand their conceptualisation of what learning might mean in this context, and also what knowledge might mean in this context. Any expectation that there might be some secure fixing of a research finding quickly dissipated, therefore. It was moments of unsettlement evoked by the absences of destroyed lives that visitors or spectators were encountering through the performance that led to what the research team called boom moments of learning through this performance. And that's sort of all I'm going to say about that. I think what it suggests to the research team and to us when we were reflecting on this afterwards is that the practices of research suggested a relationship between performance and learning, and perhaps practice and research, that's best conceptualised as a crafted, careful engagement with complex experiences that remain open to the improvised encounters and unsettlements caused by what is a dynamic and a symbiotic relationship. And I hope you can hear the craft, the artistry, improvisation and decomposition in that story that's going on. Okay, the second example, I've got pictures because this one was more closely
5 minutes, Jenny.
Great. Okay, this was a musical performance devised with and performed by refugees and asylum seekers in Manchester. It took place in the studio space downstairs, especially refugees from Central Africa and the Great Lakes region. This performance explored the relationship of participatory performance to making or remaking identity after war and displacement. That was kind of the problem that we were exploring. And we explored it through devising, workshop-based creative explorations, rehearsal and performance. And also, as the researcher involved in this project, I took qualitative snapshots, if you like, of different moments of the process where I interviewed participants and artists involved. I want to focus on the struggle for participants relating to how they told their story of the experience in the interviews, in the rehearsals, and in the performance itself. These were different stories that were inconsistent and contradictory. And during these inconsistencies, in encountering these contradictions, the research process decomposed, deteriorated. For example, the message of the play stressed the importance of knowing where we come from, and that the play had provided an opportunity for people to value their cultural identity, to communicate something about their cultural identity to a wider audience, was what the adult participants liked about the play. The younger participants, in a scene in the play, challenged that message, where they were identifying contradictions in the talk of the adults about being African and being proud to be African. Okay, so that was the scene in the play. In an interview after the project, the two of the young men in this scene, however, despite what they'd done in the scene, said that they were proud. They did like the project because it did give them an opportunity to feel proud of where they came from. However, again, it was clear when asked they didn't really know where they were from, or they couldn't say where they were from. And knowing, as we did know, we were becoming aware because of Alison Jeffers' research at this time, the importance of improvised narratives to certain audiences around refugees and asylum seeking issues at this time, we didn't press further. So both the practice and the research decomposed in this moment? We don't know. We don't know where they came from. We don't know, and we don't know what really to make of that moment of the research. Okay, so the story I'm telling you here is one way of pinning down that moment, but it leaves much unsaid, as did the performance, as did the rehearsal, as did the interview. I hope that makes sense. Okay. So this is what I'm talking about in relation to decomposition, and decomposition being an important element of practice as research. It relates to when the research and the practice decomposes in the face of some kinds of experience. What I want to suggest is the decomposition doesn't mean that the practice or the research is without its uses. Decomposition, of course, performs an important part in terms of generating new possibilities for life and perhaps a protective space. So in this case, this moment perhaps was an example of practice as research that was conscious of the social justice imperatives of applied performance and applied theatre practice at its best, perhaps. So what I want to stress really is when we bring creative arts into practice as research, or into a research process, we are creating the conditions to encounter moments of surprise, chance, contradiction, of not knowing as much as knowing. You're creating the conditions as part of your research process to encounter experiences that are going to shift the grounds of what we already think and what we already feel we know about the world. And I think that's kind of a common feature of a practice as a research methodology. And it's probably what I'm suggesting is it's that feature that makes it a useful tool as a methodology, not just inside the arts disciplines, but hopefully broader as well. And that's all. Over to you.
Well, I will just give you a short descriptions of some of the outline a few problems or oppositions within screen practice as research. And I mean, we are struggling with the same challenges, I think, but they look a bit different when you use when you use audiovisual documentation or when you use audiovisual means to as part of your research, because what you get is a document which is a bit different from the theatre experience, which you can film, but it's not the same as actually making a film that you can send around. Actually, it's a direct representation of the art practice. So this has usually been called screen practice as research or audiovisual practice as research. Screen practice is more coming from the modern word of screen studies, when you try to fit more stuff into the word, into the disciplinary area. For example, new media, etc., etc. So, not very precise way to define it would be film and video production, including documentaries, fiction, narrative, non-narrative film, non-linear, new media, internet presentations, and art exhibitions. So all of those artistic representations that can fit into the screen, basically. Well, we have the word here again. So you already heard what the RAE defined as practice-based, practice-led, and practice as research. And you had a series of research projects coming up, especially on a national basis in the United Kingdom, trying to explore what performance practice as research is, trying to explore what audiovisual practice as research is. Now, while Jenny was more concerned with HRC-funded research projects, maybe more large scale, I'm going to speak more about PhD projects, practice-based PhDs. And one resource that has been just great over the past years has been the AV PhD. And you have the you have the link down here if you want to go and check it out. It's finished now, but it was an HRC-funded project that explored how you could define and examine and publish practice as research, but it was specifically designed to meet the needs for students doing audiovisual practice-based PhDs and the examiners doing that. Because, of course, what we're facing here, and that's the big part of the problem, trying to fit practice within the existing system, is how is the examination going to work? Because what we say is, which I don't agree with actually, well, it's much easier to be objective if it's only about reading an essay or reading a traditional doctoral work, but and while it's very difficult to come with an objective evaluation of art. Now, I don't agree. I think it's especially when we're not talking science, but we're still speaking about the arts and humanities, it's quite difficult to come with an objective evaluation of someone's scholarly work. But and of course the same goes for the art practice. But please check this website out, and they also finished everything with an exhibition called the AV PhD Viva in December 2008, where they exhibited a series of practice-based dissertations, and you can still get hold of those. PhD work, so you can still get hold of those theses over there. Okay, so we have a few problems here that I would like to address. For example, traditionally, you see film as a form of representation. So in visual anthropology, for example, which I come from originally, you have a tendency to use the film as a form, a complement to your monography, for example. So you actually, it's an illustration of the fieldwork. So it's not integral to the theory. While in as you already heard, in screen studies, in screen practice as research, you need to show that the practice is integral. So there are different traditions here. And of course, there are the lines are blurred. Then another interesting problem that we meet producing practice as research is, of course, the difference between focus on the process and the focus on the end result. So, for example, if I make a film as part of my research project, I wouldn't like to only focus on the product, because what's interesting for the research is usually the process, and that's where you explore the different challenges of the research. But on the other hand, if you only would focus on the process, you might not be able to come up with a really good end result, the product. And the product is your actual publication. This is what will bring. This is what you will bring to film festivals, for example, and this is what you, in the end, submit to ref. So, and what you're usually evaluated on. But so you can't disregard any of those parts. But sometimes they contradict each other, and it's quite important to be aware of that. This project about genre of ethnographic filmmaking called ethnofiction, where people act out their own life. I'm going to present on this seminar series in October, isn't it, Daniela? And so I'm not going to reveal too much about it now, but you have the DVD in the library if you want to watch it, and I have other suggestions if you want to want to have a look at some other audiovisual practice-based work. Okay. Finally, then, we have what Jenny mentioned, and it's a traditional schism between artistic versus academic research. And I think it's the real challenges for this is more the actual discourse of the different groups concerned here. And I've been on conferences since mid-90s, especially between anthropologists and theatre directors trying to meet and work out how they can work together. And we're actually having such a conference tomorrow, if you want to come. Interestingly, it's almost like a cultural clash, because you have artists usually believe more in a total subjectivism, that they, through their work, they're expressing themselves. They have no obligation to reference their material to scholars or other art, in the same way that we as researchers feel that obligation, that we actually have to justify what we produced in relation to other scholars. So it's less about total subjectivism in that sense, and more about creating a research context. And this is the usual clash you end up with. But interestingly, what we now see is two different movements in Europe when it comes to practice-based research. So while in England, for example, we have more of an academic focus on practice as research. In Scandinavia, where I come from originally, you have these art schools, film schools, that wants to develop not practice-based academic work, but artistic research, which is, and they don't feel that they should have the same obligations as scholars and academics have. And I went to a conference about this in Belgium recently, and it was so obvious, the academics came up presenting their film clips, mostly looking quite bad, and then having PowerPoint material, just talking intellectually about their clips, yeah? And then you had the artist going, "Oh, this is my film," and it was amazing and beautiful. And then in the discussion, when they were actually, asked about what it meant and what was the research gained about, well, I don't know, man, but so you have two separate traditions, and also it's an economical aspect of this, and that's that. Of course, art people wants to get academic funding, and maybe less so also academics sometimes goes for art funding. So it's also a bit of a political manipulation going on when people apply for funding and so on. So and of course we end up with the same question. I think is maybe the most central question is, to what degree can art stand by itself as a form of research and representation? And this is also what you said, is an artist ideally would say, here's my research, do whatever you want with it. But a practice-based scholar would say, well, here's my research and here's my thesis. Don't watch this without reading that. So, just to give you an example also, artistic development of knowledge. For example, this is, of course, I'm a bit biased here because from Scandinavia, a network. And interestingly, new media and artistic research and development in new media has also become more and more connected to the industry. So the industry is interested in how they can make profit out of this as well. So you just have a look at that one if you want. And then, if you're more interested in the practice, the practice-based research part of it, please check out Journal of Media Practice, which they also present their stuff on websites, and they sometimes they publish a DVD with their publications, and that publication is becoming more and more accepted. And then screen work, screen media practice as research, which now seems that's a DVD-based journal that's sometimes have been presented as a part of general media practice. That's it.